I'm Jay Burney, and welcome to another Staying Connected presentation. This event is being hosted by the West New York Environmental Alliance and Garden Walk Buffalo, and today we're with a new friend of mine, Nick, don't you call me Shirley, Henshue, from UB. And Nick, we both share board positions on the West New York Environmental Alliance, and it's really great to talk with you today. I know that you have a very exciting life. You're a teacher at UB. And so how are you doing?
I'm living the dream. I'm, down here in, this is our den, right? This is, we were actually able to parlay that stimulus money into quite a mortgage. And so I'm totally not in front of a green screen in my basement. But rather in this beautiful place and talking with you about, what are we talking today about? Earthworms, soils, all kinds of gardening stuff. Yeah.
Either that or Jurassic Park. It's your choice, but yes, earthworms.
Okay.
So what's the deal with earthworms? I know we have some invasive species. I know that earthworms aren't necessarily native to this area.
No, actually, it's kind of interesting. The way I came about really studying earthworms in the first place was because I read a paper that said, well, of course, all the earthworms that we have in New England and the mid-Atlantic states are invasive and did not evolve to be in the forests that we have here. And I was kind of floored, like, what are you talking about? Of course earthworms are good. Of course earthworms are helpful, and they do all these wonderful things that we hear so much about, and aerating the soil and getting more water to the roots and abrading roots and helping them grow more. And as it turns out, they're not actually that helpful. They actually have a lot of detrimental effects. And the reason that they weren't there in the first place was, and this makes sense when you think about it, is 10,000 years ago, we were under a mile of ice here. We still had the Lake Iroquois, and we still had Lake Tonawanda, and there was still this mass of ice. But then off the border of that mass of ice was also, how many hundreds of miles of tundra and permafrost and boreal forest that stretched all the way down into the Smokies. So even if there wasn't necessarily a glacier at that particular latitude, they still would have suffered from the effects of, much like we see today as you approach the Arctic Circle, how you've got, this kind of slow gradient into being a deciduous forest. So go ahead.
You say, of course, with evolution, we also were under a lake or a couple of lakes here for a long time.
Right. Right.
So I interrupted you. I'm sorry.
Well, the nearest we can figure, earthworms were pushed down south of the Smoky Mountain Range, and their rate of recolonization is only about 10 meters per year. Like, they can move faster than 10 meters per year, but their actual population center only moves northward at, like I said, about 10 meters a year. And so we would still, even after 10,000 years, they would have only made it into the middle of Kentucky. So how do we get the earthworms here that we have, right? We see all kinds of different worms. There's something on the order of about 35 different species in New York State. Nationally, in North America, including Canada and Mexico, we got about 183 different species. Some of them are still native in their range in areas that we didn't see a lot of glaciation, but most of them have been moved. They get moved in mulch, they get moved in soil bags, they get moved in potted plants. Mitochondrial Dna that was done on Lumbricus terrestris, which is the big night crawler, the one that crosses the sidewalk in April. Those guys we can actually track back to being introduced sometime around the colony at Roanoke in 1609. And so, like, these earthworms were not here before the glaciers were receded, and they weren't here before colonization. So the big question is, what do earthworms do to forests in the Northeast? And
And
they, and well, and from a gardening perspective, we look at earthworms as being very beneficial. We look at them as, maintaining a good soil profile, a lot of soil carbon, a lot of tunnels in our flower beds. They can definitely help in an agricultural system or a managed system, where we're plowing, or we're rototillering, or we're putting down mulch or whatever. They're actually pretty beneficial. But out in forests, they could be very detrimental. They don't have the kind of adaptations to forests that you think would be beneficial. Here's my example. They eat up all of the leaf litter that is on the forest floor. Right? That's their main source of food for many of the species. The surface-dwelling species, we call those epigeic earthworms. They're on top of the surface, just under the leaf litter. And what happens is they're eating up all that leaf litter, and allowing all the seeds to be more easily found by squirrels and chipmunks or other granivores. There's the effect of drying out that topsoil, and so even if the seedlings do germinate, they might desiccate, they might dry out faster. There's a variety of different things, and so what we're seeing in central New York, and we're seeing in Pennsylvania and Maryland and Virginia, is areas that have a high amount of earthworm population actually have fewer seedlings and less sub-canopy trees. So we have these big, giant hickory and maple and all these other late successionary species in our forests, and very few trees are growing up underneath them to replace them. And earthworms and deer are the two major culprits of that.
another thing that happens, obviously, with the leaf litters, that's an overwintering home or even a seasonal home for a lot of
Oh, for sure. For sure.
Insects, mollusks, there's a lot of things that live there, so that harms the habitat also. So where did we get the myth that earthworms are good? I guess you touched on it when you talk about gardening.
Well, here, let me pull up. I'll do a little screen share here.
All right, we got it.
Perfect. Okay. So we have all these the positive effects of earthworms, promoting beneficial microorganisms, reducing plant pests. There's a lot that earthworms can do for soils, right? So they're good things. But as we said, a lot of these were brought in from Asia and Europe. And what that looks like on a map is during the height of the Wisconsin glaciation about 10,000 years ago, we had, this is our ice extent, right? And as those glaciers retreated, what we ended up with was effectively an earthworm-free zone. In that, so where the glacier was too cold for them to overwinter. Plus, being scraped down to bedrock and having no soil was very difficult for anything to burrow through. So in forests that we have with high populations, this is in Woodbridge, New Jersey, okay? And I want you to look at the size of the trees, right? We've got, this is an old abandoned farm field. And this is about 50 to 75 years post-abandonment. These are all red maples. I want you to look at the understory. We've got grasses, we've got shrubs, we've got some invasives. I think that's microstegium under there, some of the Japanese stilt grass. Anyway, I took this picture, and what I did, Jay, was I turned around just turned my whole body right around and took this picture. See the difference?
Yeah, for sure.
So what happens is that there in this when I tested these soils on this side, there was 300 earthworms per square meter. And on this side, there wasn't. There was only a couple dozen per square meter. And so that overall reduction in leaf litter and seeds and moisture can really be detrimental. And then we get the Amenthus earthworms. The Amenthus earthworms are the jumping worms, the snake worms, wiggling worms, whatever you call them. They go by so many names that I just use Amenthus. Um, this is my local state park by where I grew up back in Pennsylvania. And this is in June of 2016. Take a look at the leaf litter, the depth of that leaf litter. And then I went back to that exact same spot in August, and this is what it looks like. And this is, you get this kind of ground beef looking soil. One of the things that cracks me up about this is that earthworms apparently don't like the petioles and the midribs of the leaves. And so you can see there's all these little, it's like a little kid eating a bread crust. Like they just nibble at it and then they're like, I don't like that part. And they leave it lay. But this soil is totally bare. Nothing's going to grow in there. That it's not going to retain moisture. It's not going to have the other nursery stuff, like you said, salamanders, millipedes, all the other things that live in the soil, isopods. They're going to dry out, right? So we have some kind of unsavory effects as well. We've changes in species composition. The biogeochemical cycles, is one of the things we're really worried about is nitrogen cycling and carbon cycling, and how much carbon can be captured in soil. And that includes carbon dioxide from dead plants, right? If it's not decomposing as quickly, it actually can act as a sink for excess carbon dioxide, which is a really good thing at this point in our climate dilemma. But those earthworms are helping all that stuff be released into the atmosphere. So I lost my mouse here. Where are you, mouse? Let's do that. Okay. So one of the things that I do is I test. I test for earthworms, and I try and find them in. Oh, I've stopped my share. Oh, hello. There we go. This guy here is one of the Amenthus species. And these are really what we're concerned with in Western New York. They haven't been found here up until about 3 years ago. And now places that have them, they're in the thousands per just small areas. It's not unusual to find 350, 400 per square meter.
So these are what are commonly called the jumping earthworms that we're hearing about?
The jumping earthworms, right. So yeah, Alabama jumpers, gray jumpers, crazy snake worms, crazy Asian snake worms, like they're all roughly the same thing. But they're actually a species complex of 4 different types of Amenthus that all, you actually can't tell the difference without doing a DNA analysis. So we just, writ large, call them Amenthus.
I want to just tell you, we're kind of running close on our timeline here. So I want to make sure we get to the points we want to make here. But my question is this an issue for gardeners in Buffalo?
Well, let me show you. Here's my issue with it. All right, these are some hostas, and we all love to hate hostas, but this was a flower bed that had a high amount of Amenthus in it the previous fall. Now the upside is Amenthus die every year. They lay eggs in October. They die off at the first frost, and as soon as the soil temps hit about 50 degrees, they come back to they hatch and they grow throughout that summer. Now, Here's my dilemma. This is the flower bed that I had the video that you're going to see in just a second taken in. Note all of these exposed roots. This was all under topsoil the previous year. Jay, all that granularization of the earthworm casts, it got a good storm in December, and all of that soil washed off. Here's why it's an issue for gardening. Is now all of these roots that were under an inch or two of soil are now exposed. And so I'm losing a terrific amount of topsoil in our managed beds. And this is just one winter, and I lost, it averaged out to about 1 3/4 inches of topsoil that was washed away in one winter from having a lot of these Amenthus earthworms in there. So this is that same flower bed here. Check this out. This is how they move, right? Which is where they get the term snakeworm from. And this is that same flower bed the summer before I took that picture. And you can see when I'm going to put them in a cup here after catching them. See how they all move, and that's really where they get the name. Is your crazy jumping worms.
So these are in Buffalo.
Oh yes, absolutely, absolutely. As of about 3 years ago, they've been found in the major parks and in a lot of the landscaping areas, and so this is a big concern. One of the ways that we test for this is we use hot mustard water, and it's 1/3 of a cup of mustard powder, like a Coleman's mustard powder, and a gallon of warm water, and you allow it to steep for about an hour. And the chemical that gives mustard its burn also irritates the membranes of the earthworm. And luckily, it goes away in about an hour. But they dislike it so much that they try and get out of the soil. So I'm hoping we can edit out a bunch of our hems and haws in the middle and have time to see this video. So this is the way that this is our standard protocol for testing for earthworm populations. And this is actually in another flower bed of mine. As it turns out, for math reasons, the top of a 55-gallon drum is exactly 1/4 meter. So it's pretty handy. And there's your mustard water. Now check this out, Jay. This is where we really start to see those guys popping up.
This probably explains why there's a lot of robins running around like they've just eaten some hot wings.
Oh yeah. Yep. And then there's some that are just stubborn there. You see that he just was having no part of that.
So is there any control, Nick? I mean, maybe an indelicate question, but.
No, you know, it's not an indelicate question. It's at the forefront of all of the gardeners that I talk to. And the answer is that we need to be very careful, especially about Amenthus, in where we're buying mulch, where we're putting mulch, and make sure that, I mean, half of those earthworms, this ended up being about 120 earthworms per square meter here in this spot.
That's crazy.
And so we need to be very careful about where we're getting the earthworms from, or I'm sorry, our mulch, our topsoil, all of those kind of things. And that's the best we can do. Try and minimize trading root stocks with people. You know, do bare root plantings if you can. But they're still gonna go out and do what they do.
We didn't talk at all about your role at UB, and I want to ask you 2 questions. Tell us about your role at UB, but also, can people get information about these worms online anywhere?
Yes, actually, the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources has a wonderful office built almost entirely to invasive earthworms, because we can see in Minnesota and Wisconsin, you can actually see the invasion front moving through of earthworms. So they have a lot of really great information. here in Western New York. If you have trouble identifying or don't know what they look like, feel free to shoot some pictures and send them over to me. But my role at the university is I'm a professor of ecology, and I teach ecological methods, basically the standard methods that we use in ecology to measure trees, to measure water clarity, to do whatever. My research primarily revolves around soils and restoration. So I'm really interested in taking brownfields and post-industrial sites in Western New York and getting them back to being important areas for pollinators, for native plants, things like that, and for the health of people that live around those areas. So
It's pretty important work, Nick, and I'm really glad to know you and to be working with you. You're teaching at a pretty neat, newish school at UB. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. We just have officially created, we've had environmental majors at UB for going on 30 years, but they've never had their own department. And so now we have all the environmental studies, environmental geoscience majors, and the ecology, evolution, behavior masters and doctoral programs all together under one roof. And that's the new Department of Environment and Sustainability. And we're really, really proud to be able to have this in one place and kind of offer one-stop shopping for students that want to get into the environmental field. And I'll tell you what, I mean, well, Jay, you've been doing this long enough. You've seen environmental science go from being a fringe activist sort of activity to being a bona fide science. You know, we've been doing this long enough where my bachelor's degree was, we were the bunch of tree hugging hippies. And now we're, PhD scientists that work at every major corporation in terms of being more sustainable, being gentler on the earth. Like, we've come into our own as a field. And a lot of that wouldn't happen without many of the people that we're all friends with.
UB's been on the cutting edge of this stuff for as long as I've been in Buffalo. And people like Lester Milbreth, who once taught there,
Absolutely.
the leader in sustainability. We did a sustainability conference with UB in 2001, which was called the Learning Sustainability Conference. I'm so glad that you're here. I'm so glad that you're doing the work. And I'm so glad that you're on the West New York Environmental Alliance board with me. And I just want to thank you for visiting with us today.
You're very, very welcome. And come back anytime to talk about earthworms or dirt or restoration or whatever you want to talk about.
That sounds great, Nick.
So, Jay, thanks so much.